Welcome to Halifax and welcome members of the board and staff. As we hold our public board meeting in Halifax, I want to start by recognizing that we are holding our meeting in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. This territory is covered by the covenant chain of treaties, also known as the Peace and Friendship Treaties. Starting in 1693, these treaties were made between the British Crown and the Wabanaki people, comprised of the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, Abenaki, Passamaquoddy, and Penobscot. Les traités de paix et d'amitié ne portaient pas sur les cessions des terres et des ressources, mais reconnaissaient les titres de la tribu, établissaient les règles des relations entre les parties. Ces règles régissaient encore la façon dont nous devons nous traiter les uns les autres aujourd'hui. Ces traités concernant tout le monde vivant ces terres. C'est pour cette raison que nous disons que nous sommes tous et toutes des personnes visées par les traités. I want to report that the board and the staff concluded a very successful strategic planning session yesterday led by Don Thompson, KC. Don is the former Chief Executive Officer of the Alberta Law Society, and he skillfully facilitated a very interesting discussion that we had. And I'd like to thank Don, the college directors and staff for their diligent and focused work, the results of which will provide direction for the college as a modern public interest regulator for the next 3 years. I also want to update the board on board appointments. Months ago, when we were planning our strategic planning session in Halifax, the one that we've just completed, we did so on the numerous assurances we had received from the ministry that the Government of Canada would be appointing the 2 new directors mandated by the Act imminently. Unfortunately, I regret to report that the Government of Canada has not followed through on its commitment. Despite assurances, we still do not have a full complement of board directors. And therefore, we did not have the benefit of a full board discussion for our important strategic planning session that we just completed, which was planned on the express assurances from the Government of Canada that we would have a full complement for this important meeting. On behalf of the board, I want to express to the Government of Canada our disappointment. We have been without a full complement of directors for months now. The delay in making these appointments is unreasonable. We again urge the minister to make the appointments as soon as possible. I'd also like to report on the new prospective CEO and registrar. Today marks a milestone for CPATA as we will meet with our new prospective Chief Executive Officer and Registrar. The candidate will make a presentation to the board and to the staff. We will be going in camera for private deliberations so that the board may consider a recommendation from the CEO Selection Committee to hire Darryl Pink's successor. So with those introductory remarks, we have several important matters on the agenda today. And influenced and energized by our strategic thinking session yesterday, I anticipate that the board will be sharply focused on advancing the important work of the college. The first matter on the agenda is our consent agenda. And you will see that as well as the minutes of our August the 8th meeting, we have reports from our CEO and our board committees. we will be working with the regulatory committees to develop an effective means for them to update the board on their work. And so with that introductory remark, is there any item, it's our normal practice to ask the board if they have any matters that they would like to have removed from the consent agenda. And if so, we'll put it on the regular agenda. If not, we'll just simply vote on to approve the consent agenda. I should first, however, just before we do that, I missed one item on a regular item on the agenda, and that's with respect to conflicts of interest. This is a regular item on our board agenda, and I've asked board members to inform me in advance of the meeting if they're aware of any conflicts of interest on the with any items on the agenda. I have not been advised of any with respect to any of the items on the agenda for this meeting, and I'd ask the board if there are any conflicts. I'm not seeing anyone indicating that they have a conflict, so we'll assume that there are no conflicts. So again, turning to the consent agenda, is there any item that members of the board would like to have removed from the consent agenda at this time? No? All right. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Andrew, Leonora, seconded. So seeing no opposition, approved. The next items on the agenda are grouped under the title Enhancing CPATA's Governance. As the Governance Committee begins its work, there are many issues that they are going to be bringing to us for consideration as we advance all aspects of the governance model that we have adopted for the college. Ruth McHugh, the vice chair and the chair of the Governance Committee, is going to lead us through several items addressing our regulatory checklist, committing to board evaluation and orientation to committee work for directors. Karima Barwa will also update us under these items with respect to board and committee remuneration policy. Nous reconnaissons que la question de la rémunération risque de créer un conflit d'intérêts pour toutes les personnes s'agissant au conseil d'administration. Pour éviter cela, le comité de gouvernance a retenu les services d'Alan Feinlet, CR, ancien directeur général de la Société du barreau de Manitoba, pour nous conseiller. Le conseil est prié d'accepter l'ensemble des recommandations de Maître Feinlet une fois qu'il les aura expliquées en détail. So with those introductory remarks, I'd like to turn it over to Ruth McHugh to start with the first item on the agenda under that rubric, CPATA's regulatory checklist.
Thank you very much, John. So the board will recall that they have approved the framework of reviewing the college's work against a regulatory checklist that was developed by globally recognized right to touch regulation expert, Harry Caton. So the board had an opportunity to review that checklist and agreed that it would be a good framework for us to hold ourselves accountable to. The board asked the governance committee to think about a process for how we might use that framework to hold ourselves accountable. And the governance committee is recommending that we set aside a meeting each year, a committee of the whole meeting, to go through that list in detail and determine where we're at on each of the items on the list. And the governance committee discussion and recommendation is contained within the governance committee report, which the board will have certainly reviewed. So I won't go through it in detail, but just to indicate that at least annually, the board will hold a special committee of the whole meeting to review and discuss every item on the checklist, evaluate the college's status with respect to each item, and identify any action items that are required for our follow-up. The chair of each regulatory and board committee will also be tasked with providing evidence to support compliance with the checklist, and they'll be invited to attend the meeting as well. The governance committee members will also attend that meeting. So we think that that's going to be a good way for us to use that framework and to hold ourselves accountable. I'm happy to take any questions or discussion or comments.
So the proposal is that we devote our January 23rd committee of the whole meeting to reviewing the checklist. And if the board approves that, then we'll work with the regulatory committee chairs in particular to prep for that. And I think the real issue, and Ruth referred to this, and this is consistent with something else we're going to look at today, which is don't just tell us that you're doing it, prove to us that you're doing it. So I think what the board will begin to see from the regulatory committees is policies. So you'll see how they are mapping out all the processes that they are using. They're putting them in writing, they're published, they are being published or they will be published. And that will give us the opportunity to clearly say, yes, we're meeting this requirement. And the second piece, the checklist is, as we said, Mary Kate's work, but we'll also have an opportunity to, I'll say, amend, adjust, alter it as is relevant to us. And then the third thing, and I think this is the real challenge, is how do we be publicly accountable for that? And I think and my view is the end result of that meeting should be a report that the board publishes that identifies its views of compliance. And we haven't quite worked that out yet, but I think that's the process you should say. So we're saying to everyone, this is what we're doing and this is how we're doing it, and come see. Mary.
I agree with that approach. That's a good approach.
Anyone have any thoughts or concerns with that approach? Sean?
Just a quick question. Will this January 23rd will be only on this, or will it be, is that just
I think the budget too, right?
Yeah,
No, budget is December 15th.
Yeah,
right, okay.
yeah. So
Primarily, Sean, that's the
Yeah.
intention. There might be some other small items that we need to deal with by way of preparation, but this will be the bulk of that.
And Sean, if you'll recall, the checklist is quite substantial.
Yeah, that's-
So.
That's why.
I
yeah,
think it
yeah,
will take a whole
yeah,
meeting.
yeah,
That's
Yeah.
what I was hoping.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's
So that's great. Thank you, everyone. That's.
All right.
terrific. Daryl, I've just received a note from Karina. She was going to present a research, but her cough is really bad right now, so she's not able to.
she's not able to.
So, Daryl, would you be comfortable presenting that material?
So we've, so the next item on the agenda relates to the policy on board remuneration. So the bylaws authorize the board to set a remuneration policy, and the startup board, which was also authorized to do that, created a remuneration policy largely based on Treasury Board guidelines for publicly appointed members of federal boards or commissions. And it was always seen as the starting point for the process because we knew we needed to gather some experience about how it was going to work. One of the tasks that the board assigned to the governance committee was to look at our remuneration policy, and that was done initially from the very beginning of the governance committee's work. And they retained, as Tom referred in his remarks, Alan Feinblatt, former CEO of the Law Society of Manitoba, to conduct a review and give a report. So Alan, in doing so, and this is covered in the materials, he looked at a number of organizations. He dealt with a number of regulatory bodies. He obtained information from law societies and other regulators. Some of it he was provided in confidence, so he did not disclose the source of that information, but he did synthesize it in his recommendations. In effect, he is proposing, and the governance committee brings a recommendation to the board to adopt that recommendation, that we use a hybrid model for remuneration for directors in particular, and I'll speak about committee members in a second. And the hybrid involves two pieces. One is an annual retainer. Second is a per diem for attendance at meetings. And the slight difference from our current structure, and one that, by the way, will make it significantly easier for administration, is that there will be no further payment for preparation time. That will be covered by the retainer, and remuneration will be based solely on length of attendance at meetings. So that's the real essence of the recommendation. And the rates are similar to what we're paying now. So they remain consistent in the federal regime. And then they're, I say, supplemented or complemented by the retainer. In terms of committees, there are a couple of specific recommendations, and I have previously indicated to the board there is a jurisdictional question with regard to committees because the Act does not specifically say anything about remuneration of committee members. It does speak about remuneration of directors, but we've looked at this and concluded that there's no reason whatsoever that we cannot provide remuneration, appropriate remuneration to members of committees in keeping with the policy or the philosophy that we built into CPATA from day one, that we are asking people to provide their professional support for us, whether they're members of the profession or members of the public, and we provide reasonable compensation for everybody for doing that. The other specific aspect with regard to committee members relates to those who sit in adjudicated roles, and this is in keeping with the emerging practice across the country with regard to adjudicators in regulators, those who sit on discipline tribunals in particular, that they're paid a daily rate for the first 2 days of a hearing, and then that rate increases if the hearing goes into a third and subsequent days. These are significant time commitments. If they happen, I can say quite comfortably that we have nothing in the offing that we anticipate would involve this policy, but we're building it in from day one. So this policy would become effective with the new bylaws because it needs to be enshrined in the bylaws. So the plan is if the board approves the recommendation from the governance committee, that will translate into drafting instructions for the Department of Justice with regard to our bylaws with an effective date about the 1st of April. I wasn't speaking about. Boy.
Interpreters couldn't hear.
Oh, I apologize to the interpreters. Okay, so those are my remarks. But from now on, anything I have to say, I will speak more loudly.
Everybody.
Okay, so that's the report. I'll open it up for questions or discussion.
Well, first, I just want to thank you, Daryl, because you added that clarification to the preliminary materials we got, the Appendix A. And I think that that really does show the landscape and what Alan was, you know, really the breadth of diversity of what was happening in terms of director remuneration across Canada. So that it really helped me to understand the recommendations better, and I support them.
Thank you, Leonora.
I think the key thing, and Alan said this quite clearly, this is an art, not a science. There is no formula that you can simply take and adapt. It's really understanding the landscape in which we're operating. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And I've said to the board as we're talking about budgeting and things like that, this becomes a significant expenditure for the college. You'll see that when you see the budget next month. And I don't say that with any apology whatsoever. I think it's really core to our operation. And I think it's really important that we both say it and then ultimately as part of our public accountability demonstrate the value that it brings. I'll just add one aside. Jen and Andres and I spoke at the CNAR conference last month and spoke about this as part of the elements of describing how we created CPATA. And it was one of those items that people in the room just kind of nodded, and many people came up to me afterwards and said, wow, that's the right thing to do. So many professional regulators are hamstrung by the kind of the concept of volunteerism that is often built in. And we're not saying people and all of us, both staff and you all, give a significant amount of your time. There's no way that the remuneration compensates for everything that you do. But there is a recognition that we're not asking you to volunteer. There is a reasonable remuneration for the work that's put in, and it will make a difference. And so that is, again, another area where others who are looking at us saying, that's the right thing for a professional regulator to be doing today.
Just to clarify, CNR is the Canadian National Association.
Canadian
of
Network of Agencies for Regulation.
Andrew?
Yeah, so I really appreciated the report as well. I'm just wondering, have you been hearing any, and Harry balanced out the two sides of the argument well, have you been hearing any pushing in the other direction that volunteerism is the more appropriate model?
No, I think many professional regulators, and I'll call them the pure regulators as opposed to ones that are the both do regulation and representation. But most of the regulators, and we're seeing this primarily in the health professions where they really have made the separation quite clear. They're moving in this direction. More so than the law societies, for example, but they're moving in this direction, and they are recognizing that with remuneration, you can then make the expectations clearer, and you can hold the people more accountable. So you can say to people, I don't mean this in a crass sense, we're paying you, we expect you to put in the time. And I'll use this as an example. It certainly goes not for our experience, but it goes back to a previous life. And I shared this story with many, and everyone always says, yes, exactly right. We've all sat at investigation committee meetings. There are hundreds, sometimes hundreds of pages of material. And a person can walk in the room and have not read a single piece of paper and offer his or her views about the issue. And that's not fair. That's not fair to the member of the public who's complaining, and it's not fair to the member of the profession who's being investigated. And so this again changes, so this allows for the kind of conversation that a committee chair or a senior staff member can have with a volunteer, because those of us who sat around the table as staff we know exactly who's prepared. You have a much deeper appreciation of the material when you've read it than if you're simply speaking off the cuff. So that's really this kind of sets the tone. Victoria?
I just wanted to ask for clarification on the plan with regard to committee members who provide training. So we have one member on the hearing for the discipline committee who is a trainer of adjudicators. And so, to be honest, we've taken advantage of that. And it's been very beneficial, and that training has also been recorded and provided to other regulatory committees. Is it the case that we should be specifically contracting with that person to be providing the training, and that they should no longer be claiming sort of preparation work as part of the committee work?
I don't think we're quite ready to answer that. The nominating and board development committee, which is starting to look at the whole board development policy for the college, will answer that question. So we'll put it back. That'll be part of the work that committee does. And the difficulty we have with paying committee members is it is a clear prima facie conflict. So our board policy and the committee policy with regard to conflicts of interest prohibits us from paying anybody remuneration for other than their core work. So we can't retain a director to do work for the college, the same with committee members. So I think that's the issue we have to tease out. And I don't want to answer that question off the cuff. I think we'll deal with it in a more deliberative way. That's a really good question.
Thank you for that.
I do have a question about committee members. In terms of costs and budgeting, are there any regulations that identify or restrict the number of committee members on particular committees?
The terms of reference that the board has approved set the number of committee members.
Okay.
And I think Ruth and I have begun this conversation. I think as we get through, we're going to look today at some of the issue of the members of the board who are not on committees yet and how we begin to orient and provide that opportunity. And then I think there will be some fine tuning
Okay.
of those terms of reference because they were drafted before we had a board, right? So I think the size
That's
is
why I
not,
wasn't aware of it.
the size is not immutable. I think we will need to make sure we've got the right people to do the work that's required by the members of the committee in addition to staff. So that's I think is a work in progress.
Thank you.
So I think based on that, Tom, there is a requirement, there's a
Yes,
draft
yeah, I
resolution
was
in the
just,
agenda.
okay, thank you. There's no other comments or questions about the report, Mr. Conklin. Okay. So the resolution on the table is as follows. The Board of Directors accepts the recommendations of the Governance Committee regarding the remuneration of directors and committee members and directs the changes be incorporated in the bylaws. Do I have a mover for that resolution? Bridget and Jeff seconds. All in favor? Is Karima Barra? She's not on the line. Karima?
I'm here,
In
sorry.
favor? Do you vote in favor
Yes, I
of the
do.
resolution?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, the resolution is adopted unanimously. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is with respect to board meeting evaluations. The Governance Committee has developed a board meeting evaluation survey to be administered after each meeting. And I'm going to ask our Vice Chair, Ruth McHugh, to address this item. Ruth?
Thank you. And once again, this was detailed in our Governance Committee report, so I won't reiterate all of that. But the Governance Committee thought it would be a good idea to have a regular cadence of evaluation on how we feel our board meetings are going. And so every year, of course, we'll do an annual review and an annual evaluation of committees and of the board. But it's a good best practice after every meeting to ask ourselves a series of questions and then report those results back to the chair of the board and the vice chair of the board through the CEO, so that we can make sure that if there's anything that is starting to perhaps go off track, that we get on that right away. We don't wait for an annual evaluation to learn that there's something that we should have changed or tweaked. So all of that information was provided to the board in advance, and I'm going to then put a resolution on the table and then open for discussion. The resolution is that the board approves the board meeting evaluation survey and directs the CEO to administer it immediately after each board meeting.
So I quite like the questionnaire. I think we need to work with it to see if there's area,
Absolutely.
obviously. So
Absolutely.
it's not written in stone, but
Absolutely.
I thought it was a very good idea. I thought, well, it's fresh in our minds. We should sit down and
Yeah.
do a little homework.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly the intent, Leonora. Thank you. With that being said, are there any other?
So it's
questions,
been
items of
it's been
discussion?
programmed. It will be released to you. Donna, remind me when it's going out today at noon. Okay,
Got it.
so
Thank you.
High
you'll have it
noon.
today.
I
So
know.
12:15, we should all have our answers
Yeah,
in.
yeah.
right?
And then the
When you're
plan
out
is that-
enjoying the Halifax sunshine, you can fill it out.
The only question I have is when I looked at the form itself, it had just a comments column. And then at the end, there'd be a report back from the chair saying, everybody, there were no comments, everybody voted yes. So is that what you want us to do? If we don't have comments, we just say yes? Okay, so just to be clear, because there's no yes no column kind of, right?
So the survey has like a scale for
Yeah.
each question, agree to disagree,
Oh.
1 to 5.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay, let me go back.
You might not have seen
We-
the
I think
form
we,
yet.
I think
We
we
just gave you the
must have
survey
seen a
questions.
prototype or something.
I think it was just the prototype. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
so-
fine then. Thank you very much. Appreciate that clarification, Dana.
Okay, great.
Perfect. And to your point, Leonard, we're going to give this, we'll try this, we'll see if this is working, if this is effective, and we can always tweak it as we go. So that being said, there is a resolution on the table tonight.
I'll move it.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Leonora, and second. Thank you.
All in favor?
Excellent. That passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Director attendance at committee meetings. Governance Committee outlines its approach to directors identifying preferences to committee assignments or to approve without a resolution. So this is for discussion.
Yeah, exactly. And so again, that was included in the Governance Committee report to the board. And so just to refresh everyone's memory, during our September board meeting, the board asked the Governance Committee to discuss director attendance at committee meetings and provide a recommendation. The original intent was to allow new board members to observe meetings so they could learn more about the committees for which they are eligible for membership and to better understand their work. The opportunity to observe committee meetings as a guest will allow new board members to consider which committees they may wish to serve on in future. So board members are invited to audit, and I mean that in the literal sense of the word, and that is listen without actively participating in committee meetings. And so it's recommended that new board members will attend one meeting of each of the committees for which they are eligible as an observer to better understand the work of the committee, but only at your pleasure. It's not a requirement that you attend all meetings, but we would encourage you to do so that you get a sense of what's happening in these meetings.
We select one committee and audit all of them, or we audit one meeting of every committee?
Probably the best approach would be which board members are eligible to serve, and then make your decision, make your choice or your preference, make your preference known to the Governance Committee chair, that's me, and then the Governance Committee can use that information to populate committees as required.
And are the committees for which we're eligible? I know we're not eligible for the 2 statutory committees. Are we eligible for all other committees or just the board committees? Just the 3 board committees? Okay,
Exactly.
just for clarification.
Yeah, so those are the Governance Committee, the Audit and Risk Committee, and the Nomination. and
Right,
Board
okay.
Development Committee.
Okay.
So,
It's great.
so we invite
Audit
you,
risk?
governance,
Governance.
and nominating and board development. So, so currently Jeff sits on both audit and risk and nominating and board development. And Karina and I sit on the governance committee. And of course, there are public members on all of those committees as well. So, but those are the board members on committees.
So just to facilitate planning, Vicky, maybe next week we can send to the board the lists of dates of the next couple of those, each of the committee meetings. And they're all scheduled, but you wouldn't have them ready.
So that is, I think, pretty much all I have really to say about director attendance at committee meetings. This is just to approve the process without a resolution. So I welcome any comments or thoughts.
Appreciate it.
I think it's great. I think it's a really good idea. And as one of the new members,
Right,
it
yeah.
was one that I had requested. Be very helpful.
Perfect. That sounds great. Well, we'll look forward to seeing what you all think after having attended.
And once you let us know, then you'll get the meeting materials in advance, like the other members of the committee. So just more material.
I'm sorry, because I have to go back to school because I'm behind all of you. So the memo refers to have yet to be appointed to a committee. That sounds different to me than auditing. So can I just, and again, this is my ignorance, can you help me
Sorry.
clarify
Perhaps I
understanding the
should have
difference?
used the word auditing because it has a connotation in our language that is different than what it really means. And audit means just to attend as a guest
Mhm.
and listen. So that
Yeah.
just listen and observe, and that's all it means. So we need to appoint board members to committees. So for example, the governance committee right now is short, if you will, a member. So based on our terms of reference, we really should have another board member on that committee. So we'd like to invite you to attend a committee meeting to see, is this a committee that just gets you jazzed and you want to be part of this committee? And same with the audit risk committee, same with the nominating and board development committee, because everyone has their own strengths and passions about you know, where they'd like to spend their time. But I think it would be fair to say that board members are expected to also serve on committees.
Mhm.
So,
Thank you for the
yeah,
clarification.
okay, perfect. Thank you.
Is there any timeline for that? Like, do we have a timeline for it, to?
Yeah, so I think Daryl just mentioned that Vicky's gonna let you know the upcoming committee schedule. So it would be great if you could attend an upcoming meeting as soon as it works in your schedule, so that you
Oh,
can then let me
yeah.
know what your interest is, and we can make those appointments as required.
I meant to request appointment or,
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Vicky will send you the
Okay.
schedule of all the meetings. You'll attend them, and then as soon as you've made a
okay,
decision as to which committee you feel most excited about, just let me know, and then we can take that into consideration
Okay.
as we need to make appointments. So for example, like I said, the governance committee, we should make an appointment as soon as possible. Whereas audit and risk and nominating board development committee, there's not an urgent need to make an appointment. Jeff is currently serving on those committees, but it's just good for us to have sort of an evergreen list of who's interested in what, so that as requirements come up, we know who's got an interest.
I'd say that I mean, as soon as possible would be ideal, because then you get in on the ground floor of some of the sort of, new work that these
Yeah.
committees are trying to engage in, right? So if you want to leave, your fingerprints on how that works, it would be good to get in early rather than late.
Thank you.
thank you.
All right, anything else?
No, I sense approval
Okay, great.
of the approach, so.
Thank
that's
you.
good.
Thank you very much.
I'd just like to ask everyone to speak loudly.
Speak loudly so that I guess our little owl is a little hard of hearing.
Yes,
All right.
she's very old. not an old
Well, there's
owl.
nothing wrong with that, right? Being old and deaf, right, Daryl? Right? So the next series of items on the agenda are organized under the title CPATA as a modern regulator, because that's the theme. Dans le cadre de notre engagement à devenir un organisme de réglementation moderne, notre premier dirigeant, Daryl Pink, continue d'élaborer ou de réviser des politiques à soumettre à notre examen. We will be looking at board policy number 1, how CPATA operates. It's been revised to reflect our first 16 months of operations. We'll also look at some innovative work that's been done by the staff to establish the framework that describes how we will be addressing the public interest in all aspects of our work. And the plan is to approve this for public consultation before it comes back to the board next year. So starting with the first item, and then that will be Daryl Pink and Victoria Reese will be addressing these matters on the agenda. So can I start with Daryl on board policy number 1, please, Daryl?
So we've shared this with the board in a draft at our last committee of the whole meeting. We did a lot of editing and reorganizing since then. So this is when board policy number 1 was initially approved by the board. It was prospective. It was really to describe how we anticipated in doing our work. And it had a number of appendices to it. It had some kind of schedules and things like that. So based on the fact that we have now developed a business plan or an activity plan at the staff level that the board has participated in, that we've now begun to develop, and you'll approve a strategic plan based on the work we've done this week. We've shortened this to take that stuff out because it now fits in other materials that we have prepared. And it really is to describe to us and the world how we operate. And I think it will be very important when we have our new directors and when others become involved with us, that they understand what makes us different as a regulator. Some of this is fairly common. For example, we make it very clear that the operations are the responsibility of the CEO, not the responsibility of the board. Make it clear that the regulatory decisions are made primarily by the registrar, not by committees. And committees play a review role in the case of the registration committee, and they have their statutory roles in the case of the investigations and discipline committees. So many of that, those principles and the way we operate are contained here. The other thing we try to do is map out here our processes for both board and committee work in terms of how we operate. So again, we have it's not a true roadmap, but it's a little bit of a blueprint that will keep us in touch. Keeping in mind that when we approved each of these board policies, we did build in a review process. So all the board policies will go through a review, annual or biannual, depending on a variety of things. We have tasked the governance committee with responsibility to lead that work, and they will begin to do so early in 2023. They've got as clear already from this agenda, they've got a lot on their plate. So these will become part of their work in the coming months. So this has been revised, as I said, quite considerably based on discussions and input from the directors. And I think it's subject to any T's that I didn't cross or I's that I didn't dot or words that I misspelled. I think it's ready for approval.
I thought it was really well, because I went through the first bit of detail, and I'm sorry, I forgot to send you my comments on it, but it was a bit of a busy, tough time. But anyway, I just had two little bits. On page 65, the last sentence before section 5.6 is in my copy, at least incomplete. And then I had a question, I'm trying to figure out what my notes say here. And that is whether complaints processing is the same, is distinct from complaints handling. I'm trying to find complaints handling. That would be on page 63.
Just if you could just,
Oh,
I just want
sorry.
to remind everybody to speak up. As
I'm
much as
sorry.
you can.
Yeah. Yeah, I just was wondering if complaints processing on page 63. I'm trying to see where complaints handling is.
They are largely synonymous. They are.
Okay, I'm trying to see why I said that. Okay, I thought that. Okay.
On
I'll
page
have to go
65,
back.
on page 65, there is an extra word. There should be a period before the two.
Okay,
It's not an incomplete sentence. It's just an extra, a dangling
participle
proposition. Wait,
Don't
that
ask
sounds like
me.
a Simon and Garfunkel
or position statement 2. I don't understand.
song. Policy means any policy, regulation, practice, standard, procedure, process, or policy statement, period.
Oh, good. Okay, all right.
Or position statement, period.
Yeah, okay, good.
Now it all makes sense.
Well, I was incomplete before. Okay, I will try to figure out my other comment, and once I do, I will let you know.
Okay, Andrew?
Just so also a great document. One thing that's very exciting is the public interest aspect of this being regulated by the Law Society and being regulated here. I'm very excited and on board with how we're moving forward and the composition of it. The definition of public interest, is it something that's going to evolve because we're new at it? And I think there's some really powerful opportunities to bring people into the profession fully aligned. And I just wondered if your thought process is there.
So I took some of what we're working on in the public interest policy that we're about to talk about and included it in here on the assumption that it was going to be approved in the format that it's been presented. Victoria is going to present to us a proposal that we do some consultation on the public interest, so it will evolve, and if it changes, then this part of that document will have to change. But it is our first attempt to kind of put a stake in the ground and say, here's our view of the public interest. And it'll be fascinating in the fullness of time how people in the organization use that. So we're already beginning in our writing of decisions to meet the tests that we're proposing to be incorporated into the public interest document. So we're saying to people, this is the public interest and here's why. And that's not easy, I can tell you, but we're trying to do that. And so we're creating some standard forms for decision-making, which force us to do that. We're nowhere perfect. So I use the phrase frequently in an email or something to a member of the public or to a member of the profession. And I have to admit, I don't always explain exactly. I don't do what I've committed to doing, which is to deal with cause and effect. But it will. I think we will get to that place. So it's just the beginning. It's embryonic, but it's a start. And I think I hope there's a real commitment in the organization to maintain that, and so we will become much more, much clearer about what we mean when we're using that phrase.
And if I can add to that, I'm super excited about this as well, because as a regulator, for us to actually put that stake in the ground and say, here's how we view our publics, and here are the interests that we are trying to uphold and protect. So that's big work, and it's really exciting work. I also believe that acting in the public interest is truly embedded in the DNA of this organization and of all of our amazing team of staff that work in this organization. And I'm pretty thrilled that when things come to the board, it starts with, here is why we are dealing with this right now, and here's why it's in the public interest that we do so, and we frame how making this decision is in the public interest. So I'm pretty excited by how culturally the public interest is at the forefront of this organization's DNA.
Two other small ones, which was the page 48, we make reference to the holding, someone wants to hold themselves out as a patent trademark agent or want to deal on behalf of clients with the Canadian Intellectual Property Office. And CPO has, or the Patent Act has done some very strange things in terms of allowing non-practitioners to, non-licensees to do certain work. And maybe it's a minor thought, but is there any thoughts about, do we make any steps about being more clear or elaborate about what it is that we can and can't do, or any thoughts there?
Can you give me a specific reference?
So it was page 48 in the memo, and what is the PDF land?
This page is on page 49.
49, sorry. Oh, yes, sorry. Reading glasses off. Do you have the PDF land number?
That's the same, I think. Let me see.
I'm looking at page 49 of the PDF.
Not know if the,
Yeah, it is 49 for 99.
at the very top, what is CPATA?
Yeah.
So if they want to act on behalf of clients in dealing with the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, so the profession deals with on a daily basis, a very frustrating thing, which is that third-party maintenance fees. Maintenance fees are paid by third parties, but then agents are responsible for notices relating to non-payment, and so it puts us in a very tricky professional obligation bind to not be monitoring and yet be monitoring at the same time, and this perhaps not the place for it, but that intersection between that there are a lot of things that large organizations do before CPO do impact licensees on a daily basis in their practice, and how do we navigate those sorts of intersections where third parties are permitted to do things and yet the licensees find themselves in situations of professional responsibility for things that they don't maybe not have full control over as they should. So this may not even be the right place for it, but it does seem to be something that that came out to me when I read this part of it, is that there are these third-party things that third parties can do that put licensees in an awkward situation.
I'm going to say that I see this as introductory language and not being
Understood. Yeah.
So I wouldn't go into the details.
Okay,
here of it.
thank you
We
for-
had this discussion yesterday,
Yeah.
and I think it's significant for us, but I wouldn't change it
Understood.
in this document.
Thank you for that. And I'm sorry, because there's probably one other item where you're going to answer me the exact same way. But I appreciate your indulgence and opportunity, which was, and maybe it's also just for those who are listening that they can understand these sort of things are being thought about. On the admissions, we talked about this is on page 62, very bottom. And under admissions, we refer to the board makes high-level policy decisions, and then the registrar decides the admissions process. And I'm just wondering what if you could elaborate on what the vision is there. I'm sure it's correct, and I'm sure it's right, but you know, where does that high-level direction from the board begin, and the responsibilities of the registrar take over?
So there may not be, so under the bylaws, there is no role for the board with regard to admissions per se. I'm looking at Jen to make sure I get this right. The registration committee does have jurisdiction to set the standards for the exams. And our intention is to keep the board appropriately briefed on, as we're developing these. We spent hours and hours doing that. We'll continue to do that, so that the board understands the kind of the broad direction of that. So the policy decisions that the board has made, for example, relate to the support for the competence initiative. And so we've spent tens of thousands of dollars. We'll spend many more in advancing that. At each step along the way, so as we talked about the plan with regard to looking at the training programs, what they should look like should we look at a course, all that sort of policy stuff is what the board will be engaged with. And that's the board's work, is to give that high level direction. And on the individual level, individual decisions are made by the registrar. And we remember yesterday, I shared with you a couple of stories about information that we get in the course of making a registrar's decision. So someone tells us something that gives us pause, and then that might raise an issue that again we bring back to the board. We talked about, alluded to harassment and issues like that. Again, I think those are issues that we will need to bring to the board. One of the other pieces we were just looking at here in the section that Leonora highlighted relates to our commitment to equity and diversity and how we begin to look at that. So again, that's a policy issue that the board will do. So I think the statement is correct.
But thank you very much for helping me there. No more questions for me.
All right. So the resolution that's on the table then is to approve the amended board policy number 1, how CPATA operates. Is there a mover for the resolution?
Yeah,
Ruth?
and I'll second with the correction.
Leonora, yes, that's good. Consider that read. Consider that read.
Sentences.
All in favor? And before, I'm sorry, Karima, I should have asked you if you had any comments before I put the matter to the vote. I do apologize.
I spoke enough. No comments.
Okay, and you're in favor, I assume?
Yes.
So the resolution is passed unanimously.
So the second piece that that Tom referred to in the introduction relates to work in developing a statement on how we act in the public interest. And I've asked Victoria to present on this. There is a small presentation in the materials. And so I'll turn it over to Victoria.
Good morning, everybody. I hope I'm distracting you from the rain with the pink shirt here.
It's your boots, Victoria, they should say.
Wait for it.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
So the board had this for introduction at the last meeting, and you went through it in great detail. It was a very rich discussion, and similar to the way Daryl introduced the policy number 1, CPATA's public interest policy is really, it describes to ourselves and the world how CPATA will apply the public interest factors in our regulatory approach and in our decision-making at all levels. And so it was, as I said, introduced to the board in October. And there was a lot of discussion yesterday as well during the strategic planning about what it means to regulate in the public interest. And I think to Andrew's comment, it's an evolving concept. And as we gain more experience, particularly at the regulatory committees, we're learning how to apply the public interest from the context of CPATA and its regulatory approach. This policy is very unique amongst professional regulators. I don't know of any other policy like it. I know that many regulators have attempted to describe how what the public interest means, and those that have regulatory objectives certainly get closer to it. But this is quite an amazing compilation of thoughts about how to apply the public interest. So it articulates the public interest building blocks, which include obviously our regulatory objectives, our standards and principles, and it talks about how to apply the public interest factors in decision-making. And Ruth spoke about this in terms of how every discussion at the board is framed in what is the public interest in this decision. And so that relates as well to the committees, everything from the appointments process and ensuring that you're looking at the skills matrices so that the members of the committee are sufficiently skilled and representative of our licensees and the public, and the CEO, registrar, and management staff. So the purpose of this policy is to give life to what it means to apply the public interest. And the foundational factors, the foundational public interest factors for CPATA include being proactive, principled, and proportionate, being risk-focused with evidence-based decision-making. We had a lot of discussion about that yesterday. Ensuring, obviously, adherence to all of our legal requirements, consistently applying our regulatory objectives, standards, and principles, and being fair, accountable, transparent, efficient, and effective. The challenge, again, Ruth touched on this, is for the board, committees, and staff to apply these lenses when considering whether a decision or action is in the public interest. And this process needs to be intentional and meaningful and measurable. And so consideration might be had. One of the regulators with whom I worked, we had a decision matrix. It was an outline that a board would follow, the council would follow to say, have we checked off these areas for discussion? It's not so much a, let's make sure we do it in our mind, is literally to have a decision matrix, which helps us ensure that you're bringing that to the fore. And so the board really did an outstanding job yesterday, framing CPATA's strategic priorities in terms of the public interest and emphasizing both our independence and the need to be triple P and risk focused. So yesterday was a great example, and I'm sorry, not everybody could have been there to see that. So as compared to the policy that you had introduced last month, this policy has been streamlined. There was a general feeling that there was too much detail and that was distracting from the key principles and the foundations. And so now the details in most respects have been moved to the footnotes, you'll notice. And so when you look at this document, it focuses on the key public interest factors to consider at all levels, which are risk to the public, to the college, to licensees, effective regulation in the eyes of the board, staff, government, public, licensees, alternatives. The point is to be principled and proportionate and open-minded, and to consider all the alternatives. And that means ensuring that all the right voices are at the table as part of the decision. Proportionality. Does the action or response fit with the issue? Consider, as the staff will constantly remind us, what are the HR and financial costs? You may feel that a particular matter is in the public interest and part of our regulatory mandate, but can we do it? And we had a lot of discussion yesterday about prioritizing in relation to what we actually can do compared with what we should do and what we would like to do. And it's about right touch regulation. Proportionality is very much about right touch regulation. And then there's consistency in application of our policies and procedures, our decision-making, and our communications. And licensees need to know what we're going to communicate. The public needs to know what they can expect. And that includes everything from the board policy decisions, the consultation processes that we lay out, and as well as the decisions at the regulatory committee level. Transparency is key. So going forward, what we're asking today is for the board to approve this for circulation, for consultation. And I understand that Jen and Dana are creating a policy on consultation, and we will be sure to follow that. From that consultation, we would consider amendments and areas for clarification. It wouldn't surprise me at all if we have lots of areas for clarification. As Andrew said, this needs to be a living document. It will benefit from regular evaluation and consideration. And also it will benefit from our decision-making experiences and policies and procedures as they evolve. Importantly, at the end of the day, CPATA must be able to demonstrate through your actions, not just your words, not just your policies, that we are acting in the public interest. And so the two challenges for the board are, one, to be intentional in applying the public interest factors, and two, how will you measure that you have been successful in doing so? And I leave that question with the committee.
Thank you very much, Victoria. So open for discussion, please, Ruth.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Victoria, thank you not only for the materials that you provided in advance, but thank you for walking us through. Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you
Sorry,
for-
I didn't bring a copy of the policy,
Okay.
so I wanted to borrow.
Gotcha, yeah. So thank you. That was an excellent recap. When it comes to measurement, that's always tricky, right? And I think that something that is almost a social consciousness piece, like the public interest, I think it's important for boards and organizations to know that they are directionally correct, that you are moving in the right direction, and that you are considering all the right things in good faith. And I'm hoping that our regulatory checklist, as we begin to work that, like we talked about earlier, that's going to really help us to check ourselves against the public interest. So, Leonora, when you were talking about the checklist and how, it too is a living document, we're going to live and breathe this, and it will be part of our culture and our DNA. And I think that combining that with the Caton guideline document is going to help us to measure and keep on track. So just to share on that point.
All right, thank you, Ruth.
Yeah, I also thought the
Leonora?
rewrite was excellent. I really appreciated the reorganization and everything. I had one little thing before we send it out for public
Good, this is
consultation.
great, good.
And that is the footnote number 2 at the bottom of page 70. The interests of licensees are the focus of the main membership board organized the Association of the Intellectual Property Institute of Canada. I don't think we should be purporting to say what is the focus. I would say change that to a focus. I think that's going to attract some lightning.
Yeah,
That's
good. This
really
is good. This is the kind of
Thank you. That's
sensitivity we
good.
need on these things. So that's, thank you very much. Andrew?
So one of the things I caught my eye was the skills matrix for, I guess, the board and the decision makers, and that's on page, it's on 72, and that's I got footnote 3. And one of the jobs that I've had to do is to try to teach myself more about governance and to take the wisdom and guidance of the group here that has had a lot of years at it. And then on the other side of it, I know that the licensees will want to understand what happens for the non-licensees in terms of understanding the business of patent and trademark agency. And I know we've got that in the skill matrix as well. And so, and I guess things over time, right? I've got lots more learning to do, and we've all got learning together. And we've done a great job, I think, as a group sharing. But is there a thought process around structuring that, or and I wonder if there's any comments about that? Yeah.
We were,
Please,
do you
please,
mind?
Ruth,
Yeah.
please.
We were really deliberate on that, Andrew, and that is why Originally, we thought we would have a governance and nominating committee. We actually split that to have a nominating and board development committee focused on board learning, board understanding, on helping each of us brings a unique skill set, but formalizing how we share those skills and that knowledge and experience. We've got a focused committee that's going to frame that for us and ensure that we do it. So I think to your point, we've really made a deliberate effort to do that.
And I can add that on the regulatory committee, certainly investigations and the discipline committee, that our licensee members have made it very clear that they need to understand, they need our help in understanding the administrative law procedures, but at the same time, the non-licensees have been begging for information to understand the context in which licensees practice. And we've had the benefit of those licensee members on the committee who have just patiently provided tremendous value for exactly that reason. We also then look to subject matter experts. And so I think it's important to know what you don't know and the importance of getting that information before you ever try to hold a licensee to a certain standard. And so that's part of the process.
And I think you've heard a little more today from Andrew about some of the things that our licensees appear to be responsible for that are out of their control. Like maintenance
Yeah.
payments, having to report on the due dates and not being able to pay them because it's been outsourced to.
It's a difficult issue,
Maintenance.
particularly when you're in the international practice environment and you use third parties. When do you look behind what they're providing you? You know, how far do you go? What is your responsibility? And I can tell you, we haven't figured that out yet.
And another kind of disjointed comment. I think insurance has been one of the most significant issues we've dealt with the profession. And it was the startup board that set the policy for the insurance requirements very early on. And I think everything we've done since confirms that the policy is largely correct. But I say largely, I don't think it's perfect. And I think it will need some fine tuning that we, based on the experiences that we the experience we have had in dealing with dozens, maybe even hundreds of different combinations and permutations of insurance coverage that licensees and firms have. So we have a requirement. So this is how I'm going to use this as an example of how I think about the public interest based on legal advice. And it relates to the insurance. So the insurance requirement says that you must be insured by a Canadian insurance company. We've had several multi-jurisdictional international law firms, so firms with offices in Canada and the United States, come to us and say, here's my insurance situation. I'm covered for this, and I've got an American policy that does the following. And the American policy will respond in Canada, but they're not a Canadian registered company. And it would be bizarre if we required that firm to buy additional insurance to meet our requirements for Canadian registration. So I've said to them in writing, you are offside, but I have undertaken not to suspend you for breach of the regulation, because I've concluded that it is not in the public interest to do that. And I think that's perfectly within my jurisdiction. I've said it, I'm on the record, I'm going to be held accountable for that. And I've said also, I can't promise you that my successor will hold the same position. But we will deal with it. So it's an example of how you create a policy, you think it's right, and then you've got to be able to manage it in the public interest, and that's how I've done it. And so I tell that story because it's just one of dozens of decisions we are making on a regular basis that require us to fine tune. And I think the issue as well, and this is, I will rarely say that I think the government got the mix right, but I think we're learning. The experiences of the last couple of days, in my view, have strengthened my belief in that this mix of public and members of the profession governing the profession together is brilliant. And I think we're all learning together that when Andrew says, I don't know much about governance, and in effect, he's saying I'm relying on others. And Victoria says, we don't know much about the profession. We're relying on the members of the profession, and we are all learning. So things we decided 6 months ago or a year ago, we will continue to change and evolve as we learn how we work together more effectively. And again, I think the public interest will play into that because it's always really important not to be doctrinaire about public interest because it is living and breathing and changing all the time. So this document, as it evolves, I think will give us that opportunity to be flexible. Now, the problem with flexibility is you bend so much that you almost break, and that's what we have to avoid. Right? We can't be everything to everybody. We've got to be principled in terms of how we do it, and forcing ourselves to articulate the basis for exercising public interest thinking is, I think, the best protection to that. You don't just, as I said earlier, throw out the words, you articulate why. So in my insurance example, I've said, we're satisfied that if there was a claim in Canada, the American policy would respond. Now, I've done that with advice. I haven't done that just because I'm dreaming it. But we think, and the advice is, I love this kind of advice. It's that, why wouldn't they respond? Because the Canadian courts are going to give far less awards of damage than the American courts. So they're really happy to be litigating in Canada as opposed to the United States. So I see that as both a practical and an insightful comment from our insurance consultants. So that's the way this all works. And I think it's important that as we do this, so I've described this at this board meeting, so it's public, and that we're quite prepared to continue to be public about how we are doing this. It's not some buried in some secret. That's just our.
I just had one caveat to all this positive thinking. And that is that the extent to which we can act in the public interest is still confined by the Act. And we had discussions yesterday about how and I want this to be in the public forum, that the investigations committee would love to be able to do more in the public interest, but is unable to do so because of the confines of the Act. And so I'm very hopeful that we can continue our pathway toward being a modern regulator in that area by getting Act amendments so that decisions can be made that do not require matters going to hearing that don't need to be, for example.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions, comments on Victoria's presentation? Yes. So the resolution then that's on the table is that the board approved draft policy number 9. So draft policy number, board policy number 9 be published for consultation with a final version to be returned to the board for consideration in March 2023. Ruth? Jeff? Moved? All in favor? Karima? Karima's in favor. She's voting in favor. All right. Sorry?
Jeff.
Yes, Jeff. Thank you. I should speak up louder. Thank you.
Louder the better.
Louder the better. Okay. Now, I think we also want to get a report from our CFO on the financial statements. Please, Sean, if you might come forward and do that, and then we'll move on to the final matter on the agenda. I think that's the final matter on the agenda.
Actually, I forgot another.
Sorry,
We missed something.
where?
We missed 2.1.
Just a second. Excuse me.
I was going to bring it up in other business.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yes. So please, Sean, go ahead.
So the financial statements that are in the package are for month and period, I guess, month and year to date for August. These are a bit behind because of the new cadence of the meeting, of the schedule of the meetings between the Audit and Risk Committee and the board. So the Audit and Risk Committee meeting is the Audit and Risk Committee is meeting on November 23rd, and they'll get the October statements. So Normally, we would have like just be 1 month behind, but here we're a couple because of the timing. And the board has seen these at the committee of the whole meeting, the last one that we had. And this information has been used to start the budget process. And includes this was part of building the forecast number of that $87,500 surplus that we're projecting for the rest of the year. So since we've already gone through these in detail, I thought I would just open it up for questions if anybody had any questions about where we are at the end of August or since then. What I've seen since then for September, October is continuing on very closely to what we've forecasted so far. So there's no big red flashing lights or no concerns at this point. But if anybody has any questions, please.
Please, yes, this is the opportunity to get into the financial side of the operations to date. If anyone has any questions, if they, you
No
do have them in
questions.
your materials, no
I think
questions?
you've already, you identify that we're going to just kind of tweak that cadence so that
Yes.
the audit committee
Right.
gets to see them first. That's great. Also just really appreciated all of our discussion yesterday during the strategic planning about, the risks to the organization, the financial risks to the organization, given that we have a few small number of licensees, relatively speaking, and that currently the only source of financial might in this organization is licensing fees. And so we brainstormed a lot around what does that look like? How is that risk going to be mitigated? The chair of our audit and risk committee was with us yesterday and is right on top of ensuring that our risk matrix is up to date and continuing to be forefront of what we're thinking about here. So really appreciated your guidance on that, Sean. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sean.
Certainly.
There's one other item on the formal agenda with my report from the CEO Selection Committee, but I want to see if there's other business. I know
Well,
Leonora
I
has other
think we
business.
missed item 2.1.
Item 2.1 that was the consent agenda?
No, that was the minutes and the reports and things like that.
That's part of the consent agenda.
Oh, I see.
That got
Okay.
approved. Did you want to
I did
reference
have, I
something?
had
there?
a couple
Please.
of questions.
No, no,
actually.
no,
Sorry, I didn't realize
by all
that.
means, I'm sorry. I
thought we
should
were
have,
just,
I should have made it clear that that's what we were approving. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. I just had,
Yeah,
I
please, go
actually
ahead.
had a couple of questions, I think really for Ruth. One question anyway on the governance committee, and that was page 13, if I can go back to that. And there's a comment in there about, I thought there was a comment in there. About whether the third paragraph under nominations and elections process, am I in the right report here? Oh, no, I'm in the nominating and board development committee. It's you, Jeff, sorry. And the third paragraph. So the committee discussed whether elections were the preferred means of licensee participation on the board. And so I question and query whether an appointment process should be considered. So I question going down that path since that's in the legislation that we elect the licensee board members. So I just question whether the committee, consider going down that path and whether they should be spending time when they have a lot of other priorities on something that is in the legislation, changing something that is in the legislation.
Yeah, and it was just a point that was just raised as a possibility in that meeting. It wasn't something that was, extracted and as something that the committee would be working on. It's just sort of, they're just throwing ideas as to, how this all works. So I don't see it as something that the committee is working on right now. I think I'm right in that.
Okay, I just thought that if that was something that you were considering pursuing, we would want direction from the board that maybe that's not where you should focus your energies when you've got
Yeah.
a lot of other things on your plate.
Yeah, I didn't take that from the discussion. It was just, just thoughts that, the committee sort of new and on its feet and everybody just sort of,
Throwing stuff out.
just discussing, what does this all mean? But I don't think that this is where they're directing their energies.
Okay, that's great. I mean, if, you know, if necessary, take that back to the committee that,
Mhm.
I don't know if unless people disagree with me on the board.
This was part of some informal discussion yesterday, and I should have emphasized this earlier. As the committees evolve, the next step, and we're building the reporting process. I think both the governance and the nominating board development committee have on their next agenda the issue of their work plan.
Mhm.
And then we have to work on the process for how the work plan gets moved from the committee to the board for approval. And I think it's crucial from a governance perspective to recognize that committees do delegated work from the board. They don't have any autonomy. So committees can't go off on a frolic of their own. They might raise something, but they have no authority to deal with it unless the board says, this is what we want you to do. And that's crucial to that effective relationship. Now, they might disagree and then that raises the question for discussion, but it's the work plan that will give them their direction. So we're working on a consistent format for work plans, we're calling it a macro agenda. We're using an Excel process just because it's creating some consistency. A little convoluted still, not quite perfect, but I think starting hopefully I'm not sure it'll be January at the committee of the whole meeting. It's possible, or it'll be the first meeting after that the board will begin to see work plans from the committees, meet with the chairs or staff on behalf of the committees and go through what the committees intended to do. So if the board doesn't approve it, the committee doesn't do it.
Okay, well, just as a follow-up, I thought that the goals of the committee on page 14 were excellent. I really like those. I really thought that was very well phrased, very well put, and very, very, very good goals. So thank you. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you, Leonore. All right. Okay, so I want to just outline what we're going to do for the remaining time that the board and the staff have today in Halifax. It's my intention to report, to present the report of the CEO Executive Search Committee, and report on the process and the recommendation of the committee. Board members will have received an in-camera report from me on both the process and the deliberations of the committee and the unanimous recommendation of the committee. So I will report generically on the work of the committee, and then we will go in camera. That will be, that will be the end of the public part of the meeting. We will go in camera, and the candidate that the committee is recommending to the board will be introduced to the board and to the staff. And the candidate will give a short presentation. And following that presentation, the staff will be asked to leave. The candidate will meet with the board. And following that meeting, the board will make its deliberations, and we will hopefully have a positive outcome through that process. So first of all, I wanted to just outline for you the process that the committee followed. As you will recall, the board approved, after much discussion and consideration, a set of skills and matrices, a set of skills that the board felt the college needed as it moved into the next phase, the next chapter of its story, moving from a startup regulator to a fully fledged, nimble, modern professional regulator. And the board, with the input of a number of sources of information, CEO and others, we came up with these matrices, which we felt would, if we could find a CEO with those skill sets, that the college would be in good hands as we transition from Darrell's leadership to a new CEO and registrar. Boyden, the human resource firm Boyden was retained to assist the committee in the process. And as you will know, Boyden is very, very experienced in this kind of work, particularly as it relates to executive recruitment in the not-for-profit sector and in the regulation sector. Michael Neufeld and Alain Pescador led the Boyden team and did an exemplary job as usual for them. And I can say as the chair of this executive search committee that it was not my first rodeo. This is probably about the fourth time, I think, in my career where I've been involved either as a chair or as a member of an executive search committee for a CEO for a regulator or a related association. And I can say that this process was an excellent process in terms of how we, it's certainly how we approached the selection. And I would like to thank the committee members for the effort they put into this, because it did involve quite a bit of time and commitment on their part. And we had a lot of discussion at the end of the process during our deliberations. So just to identify them for the public record, Ruth McHugh, obviously she's very active as you can see in the college, and she assisted, as was Jeff and Andrew and Leonora. And Daryl Pink was an ex officio member and was there to assist us in providing the candidates with more pertinent information as to what the role entailed and what they could expect. And I want to thank personally the committee members and Daryl for their participation in that work. So with Boyden's direction, what we did is we developed a process, a rigorous process for vetting the candidates and marketing the position to eligible candidates. We approved and considered a plan that was presented to us by Boyden. And based on that plan, Boyden went out and started the process, approving the kinds of advertisements that we wanted to place, where we wanted to place them, and engaging in a systematic review of the market, inviting candidates who might be qualified from their own data banks to consider submitting. And I think in fact, I know this to be the case. They reported that they were very surprised at the interest that was expressed in the college and what we were doing. There was a higher than average number of qualified candidates for the position. And that, I think, speaks very well for what the college has been able to do under Daryl's leadership in a very short time. And so with the number of candidates that applied for the position, Boyden did an initial review and vetting of those applications and narrowed it down to still a list of candidates that was then reviewed using a matrix that was developed and approved in advance by the committee in conjunction with Boyden. Each member of the committee was asked to rate each candidate. And after that process, the candidates, the committee met and went through each of those initial list, that initial list, and narrowed the candidates down again to the people that we thought best reflected the skills that we wanted in our new CEO. And from there, we conducted personal interviews of each of the candidates. And each of the committee members participated in a systematic interview in which we asked probing questions to try to elicit information and the approach that each candidate would take to critical issues that the college is going to be facing in the years ahead. Again, each member of the committee acted independently in assessing each of the candidates. There was no discussion between the committee members until they each had completed their individual assessment And from there, further deliberations took place, and we narrowed the list down to a number of, we narrowed the list down again. And we conducted personal interviews of those final candidates. And from that list, the committee had some really interesting discussions about the final candidates. And I can say that to a person, if I can date myself, it blew our minds, the quality of the candidates that we had and the excellence in the final candidates that we had to choose from. And so it made the deliberations of the committee extremely interesting, difficult, but in the end, we came to a consensus as to who that candidate should be. And that candidate is here. And the final process that we are now engaged in is to make sure that the fit is a good one for the staff and indeed for the board of directors, who ultimately the CEO will report to. So with that report, I'd ask if any members, Karima, anyone, if you have any questions you'd like to pose on the process, I'm more than happy to address those. Obviously, many of you here were involved, so you know how it unfolded. So, Brigitte, Karima?
Tom, I think you heard my views yesterday, so I have nothing further to add.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, so before we go in camera, there is one final thing I want to say. You know, my family always jokes that you shouldn't let dad watch a Disney movie because he's going to cry at the end for sure. So, but before going in camera, I want to formally thank Daryl for the inspiring work that he has done as the college's first CEO and registrar. The board and the staff are unanimous in the view that the college owes its successful establishment as a modern independent regulator of patent agents and trademark agents to Daryl Pink. His wealth of experience, his tenacity, his sound judgment, his enthusiasm, and his energy were all brought to bear in good measure in this endeavor. Daryl has a blend of deep experience in and knowledge about professional regulation combined with a remarkable entrepreneurial spirit. It's this blend that produced the result that we see today. In retrospect, the combination of talents and experience was exactly what was needed for a startup professional regulator. A unique man for a unique task. In a short time, Daryl took the college from an idea set out in an act of parliament to a fully functioning modern regulator. No money, no office, no telephone, no computer, no place to hang his hat, no human resources except for a few peripatetic directors. Yes, Daryl, you were without a doubt the right person for this daunting challenge, but in my books, you're more than that, as you can see. You're nothing short of a regulatory wizard. To have pulled this rabbit out of this hat that you didn't have any place to hang is truly a remarkable, remarkable achievement. And congratulations, my friends. You've served us so well. Thank you. À vous, monsieur.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to all. I wasn't expecting that. One of the probably the greatest personal benefit to this, I've been doing this a very long time, and the professional part of it is really gratifying. But for me, it's that I've made a whole bunch of new friends. And at this age and stage in our lives, new friends are very precious. And I really feel that I've become friends with all of you, professional colleagues at the board and the staff. And that's been a real highlight. And I hope that we have the opportunity to maintain those friendships. The challenges that lie ahead of us, at least us for a few more weeks for me and then for you, are considerable. But we're well on the way to meeting the vision that this board has set for the organization. And I don't say that in any way to be glib. I think we're doing some really, really good things. And I think as the world of professional regulation continues to watch us, that will be more and more acknowledged. Professional regulation generally is very conservative. And what we've done is taken a somewhat more progressive view about how this work can be done effectively in the public interest. And I'll share two very quick observations and stories. I spoke about being at the CNR conference, and I started my remarks by saying to everyone, saying to the people in the room, everything that we are going to say to you today is on our website. And they looked at me like, what? And I said, yes, we made a commitment to being a public organization. No one, I don't think there's another regulator in the country that, that's not quite true. There are very few regulators in the country that broadcast their meetings in both official languages and leave them on their website for others to look at. And everything that we've done, we make public. And that builds a degree of accountability and a sense of responsibility to our stakeholders that is unprecedented. So I think we're all to be congratulated for that commitment. And the part of that I think is really important is that we've now seen as these meetings happen that there's no the discussions are frank. No one's worried that there's a camera recording these discussions because we're committed to doing this work, and that's really important. And the second thing is what I call the commitment to professionalism. There's been a real recognition within this organization that regulation is in itself a profession, and you've allowed me to build this organization with professionals doing the regulatory work. And then that's allowed us to recruit professionals to make the regulatory decisions. And that is unprecedented. We've built a structure that others will continue to look at because we're saying if there's a whole range of skills and attributes of knowledge that you require in order to do this work. And you said to me, go find those people. And I think I did. And I think you have continued to do that in the process that we're about to embark upon with the new chief executive officer and registrar. So it's been a lot of fun for me. It's been a great way. I said many times it was the perfect way to spend the pandemic because it allowed me to be holed up in my little home office and work and not drive my family crazy. That was really nice. So that was that was something that was quite fortuitous, but also, as I said yesterday, it's really wonderful as one has a lot of experience in doing something to continue to do your best work at this stage of your career. That I don't feel that and I look forward to what's next. I don't know what it's going to be, but I'm sure there will be other ways that we can continue to trade on the work we've done with CPATA for the public good and for the benefit of others. So I really say to you, Tom, and to Ruth and Jeff, I wish Doug were here, and to Karima, who were part of that first group, and then to Andrew, Bridget, and Leonora, who have joined us. Thank you. It's been a wonderful. These are very few and rare opportunities, and I'm the one who's benefited significantly. So I reiterate the thanks, my friend.
So look, it's now going to fall to our new CEO and registrar, supported by the outstanding team that you've assembled, Daryl, to carry us forward and to build on your legacy. So it's no exaggeration in your case that the college will be indebted to you forever. Okay, so that's the end of the public meeting. And we're now going to go in camera for the consider
Quick break. So
and we're going to take a quick break before we do that. I think we all need that. Thank you very much. And we'll be back in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.